Welcome back to the Francis Crick Institute here in central London for the second of our leader interviews. Now this place will soon be finished, and when it opens later this year it is going to be the biggest biomedical laboratory in the whole of Europe. They'll be doing some of the most advanced scientific research in the world here, testing their theories. We're using this splendid location to test some of our political leaders. Tonight in the chair, it's the turn of Prime Minister David Cameron, leader of the Conservatives. Prime Minister, I'd like to start by asking, how many marks out of 10 would you give yourself for your record so far as Prime Minister?
I don't think any Prime Minister should mark their own homework. We've taken that out of schools, and I don't think we should have it in politics either. Look, what I've tried to do, leading the first coalition government for 70 years, is effectively to turn the fortunes of the country round, to turn the economy round, and 2 million more people in work, 750,000 more businesses operating in Britain, growing faster than the other major Western countries. I think that's a strong record, but it's a foundation on which I want to build for the next 5 years.
I mean, I'll push you a bit harder, because you have said the job is half done,
yeah,
which would imply 5 out of 10. But I think you'd probably think it's better than that, wouldn't you?
Well, I think the job is half done because what we've done is turn the economy round, got Britain going again, but these are foundations on which to build. You know, we got 2 million more people in work, now let's get full employment. We've cut the deficit in half as a share of GDP, let's now get rid of it altogether. And that's what excites me about the next 5 years, is it's only with a strong economy that you can achieve the things that we dream of, jobs and homes and livelihoods for more people, more dignity and security in old age. These are the things that are in reach of our country if we stick to the plan and build on it. So you won't get me marking my
right.
There are plenty of people to mark my homework.
Right. But not a 10. It wouldn't be a 10, would it? I mean, you'd never give it a 10.
No one ever achieves
right.
those
perfection. Things. Look, we dug this little leaflet out from the last election. David Cameron's contract with you. Yep. It has a sort of number of promises with your signature next to them, and it does say, if we don't deliver, kick us out. Now, not all the promises you made at the last election are in here, and a lot of the things in here you've done, actually. Lots of them you've done, but not all of them.
I've got it with me too.
Seriously?
Yes. That's what it looked like.
Right.
That's what, so I've got it too.
That is fascinating. Now, because you didn't actually technically meet the contract, because you didn't score on all of them, should we mark you down, maybe give you 20% fewer MPs than you had last time?
I think you should just look through that contract and see what is done and what isn't done. And from memory, recall for MPs, that was done. Safeguarding pensioner benefits, that was done. Making sure we took the big decision of investing more in our NHS every year, that was done. But there are some things in there, for instance, getting net migration down to tens of thousands that we haven't achieved. But I think we went through it and we saw something like of the 28 pledges, I think something like 22, pretty well fulfilled, and others in progress. So I'm prepared, I'm happy for people to look at that and to judge me on the record.
Right. Immigration was the one the experts said you couldn't do. You said you could do it, and you turned out on that one to be wrong. But there are lots of other things that you have said you can do and you can't do. You said you could get the deficit eradicated. You haven't done that. You said you wouldn't reform the NHS.
Well,
you did reform the NHS.
Let's take these one by one.
And we could take others. The VAT one, there wasn't going to be a third runway at Heathrow, and now you can't.
It's good to take these one by one. On the deficit, we said we'd cut it. We cut it by half as a share of our national income. And we said we'd get debt falling as a share of GDP by the end of the Parliament, and we have done that. On the NHS, we said we'd increase spending every year. That was a very big decision, Evan, because remember the mess we inherited, the appalling situation, and to say we're going to single out the NHS and keep investing it every year, that was a big decision, and we fulfilled that, more than fulfilled that.
So you're satisfied
with what you've delivered. And on the third runway at Heathrow, we have not built a third runway at Heathrow.
But you counted. But look, your line is you've delivered well, even if you didn't deliver exactly what you hoped at the beginning. But did you at least overpromise? Now, the reason I ask this is that you've been lavishing promises around in the last few days, and a lot of experts, like on immigration, say these are going to be very, very difficult to pay for.
I don't think we did.
We only have your word on it.
Well, let me answer that very directly. I don't think we did overpromise at the last election. I was reading my 2010 Manifesto today, thinking you might ask me about it. And I think what comes across, even though we've had a coalition government and couldn't achieve all the things we wanted to, pledge after pledge has been fulfilled. And in some cases, like on freezing the council tax or on getting people back to work, getting people off benefits, we have over-delivered on what we promised. Now, as for what we're pledging in the next Parliament, all of what we've promised is, I think, achievable. And in some cases, it's actually more modest than what we've achieved in this Parliament.
If you got up at early hours of the morning and turned on channel 498 and watched one of those infomercials with the bloke selling stuff, and he sold you a steam mop that swept and cleaned, and you found it didn't sweep, it just cleaned, and then he came back and said, I want to sell you it again, you would say, I've got to be a little bit suspicious about the promises this time, because not all of them were delivered last time.
Except for the fundamental pledge we made, we said we'd cut the deficit and not the NHS. We have delivered on that. We said we'd turn the economy around and get the country back to work. We've delivered on that. We said we'd get people off benefits and into work with the biggest back to work programme in our history. We've delivered on that. So I would say...
So it's a mixed picture.
Of course, look, we haven't achieved everything I wanted to. But I would say we're well down the road. Britain is far stronger than when I became Prime Minister. And I think that if we have another 5 years, we can really not just complete the job in terms of ticking the economic boxes, but what I'm interested in is trying to help and change people's lives, trying to make sure more people get that job offer. People can keep more of their own money to spend as they choose. More people get what I've got, which is 3 children at a great state school in London. That's what I want to see.
I want to move on to the area of defence. Now, there's a reason why I'm picking defence. It's because it's one of the departments that is not protected. You've not ring-fenced it from budget cuts under your next government. Now, the interesting thing is that you've made choices to ring-fence some things, but not that one. And a lot of your maths, for it to work, is going to rely on cuts in departments which you haven't ring-fenced. Why have you chosen not to ring-fence defence, but you have protected overseas aid and you protected health?
Well, the defence budget is 3 times the size of the overseas aid budget. It's on a different scale, and rightly so. And we've made some important pledges about defence. We've said the equipment programme, which is 160 billion over 10 years, absolutely essential. When you think of the mess we inherited and the black hole in the defence budget we had to sort out, that is protected, and that has a guaranteed above inflation increase every year for a decade. We've pledged not to cut further the numbers of regular service personnel in our armed services. We've guaranteed to replace in full the Trident submarine, the nuclear deterrent, which is essential, in my view, for our nation's security. Now, we'll have a full defence review and spending review if we're in the government in the autumn, and that's the right time to make the final the final decision.
You would agree.
But I would challenge the premise of your question, which is, I think overall what I'm proposing is somehow not achievable. I would challenge that completely. It is achievable, and I'm going to, if I can, just take a minute to give you the figures.
Look, defence has had big cuts under the last in the last Parliament.
Well, it was sort of frozen in cash terms, actually.
And all those unprotected departments, on average, face, over this next Parliament, cuts of what percentage?
Well, overall departmental spending has to be reduced by 2%.
But the unprotected departments, because a lot of them are protected.
Well, that will depend on the decisions.
Department.
Right, well, let me take this to the big picture. I think it's important. What are we proposing? Right, in the last Parliament, we had to make an adjustment of 120 billion in terms of spending reductions and taxes. In this Parliament, the figure is 30 billion. So it's a quarter of what we had to achieve in the last Parliament. In the last Parliament, we cut taxes by 10 billion.
I'm getting bamboozled by figures.
Well, you normally like figures, Evan.
I love them, but there's one. I only want one.
Right.
What is the average cut over the next Parliament in the unprotected departmental budgets like defence? Well, given all your promises on health and transport and all those other things, what are the unprotected departments?
Departmental spending overall has to come down by 2% a year.
But the unprotected departments are coming
down
by
on the individual,
15%.
That will depend on the individual decisions.
On top of the cuts in the previous. Now, do you agree?
But Evan, this
your
is
manifesto says the world is a more dangerous place.
Yes.
And you have not protected defence. You have defence as a department that is slated for on other things being equal, 15%
Well,
cut.
what we did in this Parliament, with much tougher circumstances, is we effectively froze the defence budget in cash terms. We are the second largest defence budget in NATO. We're the biggest in Europe. We're the 5th biggest defence budget anywhere in the world. We're protecting the equipment programme. But also, Evan, I would say this, defending our country is not just about the defence budget, it's about the counter-terrorism budget, which we've safeguarded, it's about our intelligence and security services, which we have safeguarded, and I would also argue that part of our overseas aid budget is about trying to stabilise countries from which the terrorists and the problems come. So I look at, that's why I set up a National Security Council, because I wanted to make sure we keep our country safe with everything we've got at our disposal.
Prime Minister, we have a 0.7% of national income target for overseas aid, and we hit that because it's an international obligation that we signed up to hit it.
But other countries haven't, by the way.
Yeah,
and yes, we're a country that keeps our promises to the poorest in the world, and we should be proud of that.
Yeah, we're proud of that. OK, we have a 2% of national income on defence. NATO obligation, we promised that to our NATO allies. In fact, back at the NATO summit last year, you were badgering everybody to come and sign up to the 2% and meet the 2% like Britain does. But you're not going to be able to say to me now, I don't think that you're willing to say Britain will stick to its international obligation on defence, even though the world is more dangerous.
We have, all the time I've been in government, we have kept that 2% commitment, and we're keeping it clearly this year and next year. And the other point I'd make is when we met in Cardiff, there were dozens of countries in NATO that have never got anywhere near 2%. Britain has the second biggest defence budget in NATO, and frankly it is time for other countries, particularly European countries, to at least get close to the 2% that we've been achieving year after year.
Can I be clear that we will meet the 2% for every year that you are Prime Minister if you're re-elected?
I will make those decisions if
That's
re-elected.
Not an answer.
No, but it is an answer. This is when I'm going to make the decision.
Is the answer.
I'm going to make those decisions in the autumn when we've had the defence review and we look at public spending in the round. But we the fifth biggest defence budget in the world. We're not the fifth biggest economy in the world. And I will never put our defences at risk.
General Sir Richard Sheriff was number 2. General Sir Richard Sheriff, number 2 in NATO military command. I think what we see now is an army that's deeply hollowed out as a result of the commitment of this army to what was comparatively a small war in Afghanistan and a failure to really invest in the sinews and muscle that keeps an army going. What we have in the last 2 decades is a form of physical and moral disarmament.
I don't accept that for one moment. I remember as leader of the opposition in 2006 and 2007 going to Afghanistan and finding our troops did not have the correct equipment, they didn't have enough helicopters, they didn't have the right body armour. Under this government we have prioritised the equipment programme so our troops and our armed forces are now some of the best equipped anywhere in the world. Evan, take one example, just take the Navy and look what we are building now. The 2 biggest aircraft carriers that the Navy has ever had in our history. Hunter-killer submarines that can patrol the seas silently. A replacement to the Trident nuclear deterrent.
Prime Minister, you're bamboozling me with figures.
Well, these are important.
But let's be clear. We have fewer ships than we had in the Falklands Task Force back in 1982.
But we have
if Argentina, and it won't happen because we've defended the place to the hilt, if Argentina got the Falklands now, would we be able to get it back, do you think?
They're not going to take the Falklands now.
But would we be able to if they did?
The question is right, because we have Typhoons stationed on the Falklands. We have patrol ships stationed at the Falklands. What I look at is our country adequately defended against the threats that we face? And my answer to that question is yes. And actually, if you look at the equipment programme and what we're investing in, British Army personnel, Navy personnel, RAF personnel will tell you now we have got better equipment than we've ever had in our history. And that's what matters, is actually not the number of battle tanks you've got stationed in Germany, but have you got the modern equipment to keep our country safe with the threats we face all over the world?
Let us move on to another piece of your plan, if you take power after the election. There are 2 big things in the programme that will change or affect household incomes. One is you're planning some tax cuts in the later part of the next Parliament, and the other is you are planning some significant welfare cuts in the earlier part of the next Parliament, £12 billion of them. You've spelled out what 3 billion of those are, but you haven't told us what the other 9 is. Can you give any elucidation at all today as to what the other 9 are?
Let me just return once more to this big picture, because I want to get across that it is affordable what we're saying. So in the last Parliament, 120 billion of savings compared with 30 billion this time. We achieved 10 billion of tax cuts last time. We're only planning 7 billion this time.
Again, you're bamboozling me with figures, and people look at these figures and say sometimes there's apples and pears, and it's not quite. It's comparing, not quite comparing like with like.
It is comparing like with like. It's not complicated, and I'm trying to get across that what we're proposing is totally affordable and doable, just as we did it. We have a track record on these things. Now, welfare. It is vitally important we continue to reform welfare. We inherited an out-of-control welfare system where people were working hard, paying their taxes to support people on welfare who could work but chose not to work. I think that is wrong. Here we are in London doing this interview. there were people living in houses getting housing benefit of 70, 80, 90,000 pounds a year. That was taking 4 or 5 working people, all their taxes, to pay for that benefit. That was wrong. It needed to change. Do we need to go on reforming welfare? Yes, we do.
Well, let's talk about 12 billion and what 12 billion is, because I think most people will find that abstract. Let's suppose you took 12 billion in a year, that's your saving, and you divided that across all the households in the country. What would it be?
Well,
roughly,
it is half as much as the 21 billion that we saved in
roughly
the last...
what would it be per household in the country?
You're bamboozling me with figures now, having
I'm
complained
just asking
about it. But
so you don't know. Shall I tell you what it is?
Please do.
It would be £450 per household in the country. It's getting on for a tenner a week for every household in the country. Now, you're not going to, I don't think, spread it across all the households in the country. If it's an average of 450 for each household, and it's not going to be across all households, it's going to be like 1,000, 2,000 quid for some households. Aren't they entitled to say, aren't we all entitled to say, tell us which households are going to have this cost imposed on them?
Well, first of all, it is right to reform welfare for the reasons I've given. And also, if you want to minimise reductions in spending departments, it's important to reform welfare. Second point is, 12 billion is half of what we saved in the last Parliament, again, showing this is affordable and achievable. The next point I'd make is we have given a very clear pledge that we're going to freeze unemployment benefit for the first 2 years of the next Parliament. Evan, can you remember at any election, any party making as difficult or clear a pledge about welfare as we're prepared to make before this election?
You are able to tell me the tax cuts in detail with specific numbers, the tax cuts you're going to make in 2018, 19 and 20, but you cannot tell me the bigger welfare cuts that you're making next year.
Well, we've set out
that's terribly cynical.
No, we've set out.
It's a good news.
We've set out the biggest. We've set out the biggest one, as you say, of the 12 billion. The 12 billion is half of the 21 billion that we achieved in the last Parliament. But also, there's this point, Evan. Part of this is continuing with a programme that we've had. We have been getting people off what was called incapacity benefit and back into work, and we're going to continue with that, successfully reducing welfare
so
loss.
Incapacity benefit will go down. The bill will go down under the...
We believe it's not called incapacity benefit anymore, but we're convinced we can go on getting people back to work.
Right.
We've said
child
we're going to
benefit, is that one going to go down? Is that going to... Do people who get child benefit, should they expect it to be going down if you win?
We've made our reforms and people can see what we've done. We've said, for instance...
You need to find 12 billion. You need to be getting 450 for every household in the country.
I've said, for instance, we're going to go on with the work we've announced about saying that young people should no longer have the option of leaving school, signing on and getting housing benefits straight away. They should be either earning or learning. If we're successful in creating the 2 million jobs in the next Parliament, just as we've created 2 million jobs in this Parliament, that is 1 million higher than the current forecast, and that will reduce the benefits bill. So there's a whole programme of work that which, if we continue with, we can continue to get welfare down.
Pity you've been in government for 5 years and you've been unable to do that work hitherto. Look, Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister, says it's impossible to do what you want to do without hitting children, without hitting the poor, without hitting the disabled. You can't deny that, can you? Because you don't know where the cuts are even going to come.
Nick Clegg thought it was impossible to carry out our economic strategy and get the country back on track. We managed to persuade him it was the right thing to do.
He was Deputy Prime Minister. He joined in. He stands by all of that.
He did join in.
And he says, can you deny it'll hit the poor, the disabled, or hit children?
No, the principles we will apply is, first of all, we should protect the most vulnerable people in our country, and we have, throughout this government, protected their benefits. Second of all, we must make sure work pays. That's a crucial part.
Prime Minister, if you don't know where the cuts are, how can you say any of these things are going to be achieved, or who is going to be hurt? How can you deny that the poor, the disabled, or children will be hit? Because you don't know where the cuts are coming.
Let me finish. I'm explaining the principles we're going to apply. So you protect the poorest and most vulnerable, you make sure that work pays, and you also protect pensioners because it's more difficult for them to change their circumstances.
Does that add up to £450 per household?
Well, as I say, that is
does that get you 12 billion? But you don't know it gets you 12 billion because if you knew it got you 12 billion, you'd be able to tell us where they're coming.
Well, I'm confident, with a track record of 5 years where we cut welfare by 21 billion, we can now find 12 billion of savings. I'm confident that having made 120 billion pounds of adjustment in the last Parliament, we can find that further 30 billion. What we're saying here, in order to put it in context, is we've got to save 1 out of every £100 for what the government spends for 2 more years. That is the scale of what we've got to
Right.
do. It's not easy.
I need to stop you on that one, because it sounds very little when you say £1 for every 100 over 2 years. But for the bits of government that are under your control, the bits of spending, it turns out to be a great deal bigger than that, doesn't it?
With respect,
for working age welfare,
respect,
12 billion is a huge sum. For unprotected
Yeah.
departments, that £1 in 100 turns out to be 15% over the Parliament.
But with respect, this is what the Labour Party and a lot of commentators warned about in 2010. They said if you go ahead with spending reductions and efficiencies, you will destroy public services in our country. That has turned out to be nonsense. We got 1 million more children in good or outstanding schools, a health service carrying out more operations and more scans and helping more people.
And people will judge the record. People will judge the record for themselves.
Let's look at areas
no, but people will judge the record.
Well,
we need to move on. Yeah. And people will judge the record. They've heard what you say, and they'll judge the record for themselves.
You know, we should look at the outputs of these services. Take the police. Crime is down 20%.
We're going to move
even
on.
though they've
We're going
had
to move
do
on.
it
People will judge.
honest.
People will judge the record. They'll have their own view, and it won't be on the basis of statistical brickbats, I'm sure. Look, I want to move on, and I want to give you a chance, really, to rebut what is, I think, one of the central objections people have to the Conservative Party, and it's that it's a party of the rich. You've heard this before. There's polling evidence that shows this. I can quote it to you, but let's not.
This makes me
waste
more angry than almost
right.
anything
so
else.
Good.
In,
I want to see.
yeah.
I want to give you the chance to rebut it, and because I think it is what puts a lot of people off the party. Let me just ask you: do you agree that there are lots of deserving rich people? Right? There are lots of people who've been enterprising, successful. They've created wealth and they've earned it. Do you agree that there are a lot of rich people who are undeserving?
Well, I believe there are rich people who should pay their taxes and should make a big contribution in terms of taxes to our country. But what infuriates me so much about this is I think of what we've done. We've taken 3 million of the lowest paid people out of tax. We've got
That's
2
at the
million
bottom
more
end.
people.
I'm focusing on the top
but it's the
end. I
people
want to focus
at the
on the
bottom
top
end that I care about. That's what this government has been about, is more good schools for children from low-income backgrounds, getting people into work who've been unemployed. And also the other thing... Quite a lot
of people think, yes, there's a policy there for the bottom, but they find it very distasteful that some of the people at the top, frankly, they think, are taking the mick. Now, I just wonder whether you share that view.
Yes.
You do.
Yeah, there are people who don't pay their taxes who
is
damn
it just
well
about
should.
Is it just about taxes?
Well, I think that's a very important point, which is, you know, we've got businesses in Britain that have arranged their affairs so they don't pay taxes in Britain. And we've gone after them, the first government to introduce a diverted profit tax to make sure they pay their money.
But you're reducing it to taxes, and I'm wondering whether there isn't more to people's distaste for some of the rich than just whether they pay taxes. Let me ask you this. You once said, I feel physically sick when I think about giving votes to prisoners as being asked by the European Human Rights Court. I feel physically sick.
Yeah.
Do you feel physically sick when you see rapacious capitalists, for example, care companies telling their staff on minimum wage that they're not going to be paid for the hours they spend driving?
Yes, I find totally offensive.
You find that offensive?
Where companies...
Property developers...
Hold on, Evan, if you're going to ask me questions,
go on,
because actually we
have
put more investigative power into the authorities to get after these companies that don't pay the minimum wage, and there are many in the care sector, and we're actually seeing more companies pay higher penalties because of that. And I'm proud of that, because that does make me very angry when I see that.
Right, property developers who are building luxury flats rather than affordable homes, bamboozling local authorities into getting planning permission for things that are not suitable for local people.
Should be building...
To make you angry?
They should be building a rate. Look, if they've got to do what they said they're going to do. If they get planning permission for one thing and build something else, that's wrong. But property developers should be building houses. Now, that means market houses. It means affordable houses. It means starter homes. And there's a very good track record there now of homes being built and helping more people onto the housing.
What about contractors overcharging government? You know, big contractors, big companies, lots of government contracts.
Yeah, infuriating.
My goodness. That is mad.
Yes.
Because what is interesting, Prime Minister, is that I don't think people feel they get that.
Well, I'm very glad you're giving me this opportunity.
Yes.
Look,
do you feel physically sick?
I feel as Prime Minister, I feel directly responsible for not wasting people's money. And when
Slum
I find
landlords,
companies,
does that make you really annoyed?
Of course. But let's go back to the last one before you jump on to the next one. You know, I'm infuriated when businesses overcharge government, say for IT programs or for large projects. And again, this government's taken action.
Oh, well, it's interesting.
These are all areas where I think we've got a good record.
You've given us some anger. What I want to do now is I want to play you a clip, okay? It's a clip, it's a piece of political history.
Right.
It's 23 years old. It's back at the Conservative Party conference in 1992 when you were a junior in the party. Peter Lilly, the Social Security Secretary, gave a sort of parody of a Gilbert and Sullivan song up there, talking about the people that he wanted to deal with. Let's just have a look at that clip.
I've got a little list of benefit offenders who I'll soon be rooting out, and who never would be missed. They never would be missed. There's those who make up bogus claims in half a dozen names. There's young ladies who get pregnant just to jump the housing queue. And dads who won't support the kids of the ladies they have kissed.
Can you imagine any Conservative minister making a speech like that about people at the upper end of the income scale?
Yes.
Can you?
I can. I mean, look, well, I think we've acted. More people are paying penalty notices for underpaying their staff. We're cracking down on businesses that overcharge government. The richest, back to tax, but the richest 1% in our country pay 27% of total income tax, which is a higher percentage than was the case under Labour.
Partly a reflection, of course, of how rich they are.
Well,
and how much they
we've
earn.
charged foreigners stamp duty on expensive properties in London for the first time. We've made sure they pay capital gains tax, which they didn't do before. I've led an entire world effort through the G8 to make sure we crack down on tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance by getting countries to share tax information.
One of the things, ever since that speech, that Peter Lilly speech, there has been this image of the Conservative Party as the nasty party, hasn't there? Picking on the poor, focusing on welfare recipients. Do you think that has been a problem? Would someone be able to make that speech now?
Well,
has your party changed?
That is not what I see as the Conservative Party. I see as the Conservative Party a group of people who are passionately patriotic about our country, who believe that conservative policies can actually help the poorest and those with least in our country, because we want education and schools that give people the chance to make the most of their talents. We want to create an economy that creates well-paid jobs and careers.
So that speech wouldn't be made now?
Well, I think someone would make a speech today rightly about how we need to make sure welfare isn't wasted.
But not like that. Well, it's the tone I'm talking about here.
Tone is important, I accept. But look, there'll be people watching this programme who go out, who work damn hard every day. They pay their taxes. They don't pay their taxes so that people who can work choose not to. The reward sometimes for irresponsible behaviour can drive people mad, can drive me mad, and that's one of the reasons to reform welfare.
Look, last question. Since 1992, in fact, since that speech, the Conservative Party hasn't properly won an election, hasn't won a majority in the House of Commons. Why do you think that is the case?
I think you have to take each election in turn. I think at the last election, when we came close, I think, frankly, people were very worried about the state of the economy. We were teetering on the brink, and they weren't fully sure we had all the ideas and plans. What I would say is this time, people can see a track record, an economy turned around, more people in work, the deficit paid down, Britain on the brink of something special, turning that good economic news into good news and a good future for you and your family. And this time, I believe they can put their trust in me and in the Conservative Party to deliver that better future for the country.
And if you win in having the most seats and you don't have a majority, will you feel that's a failure or a success?
Oh, I'm going for a majority. We are only 23 seats short. And if I fall short of those 23 seats, I will feel I have not succeeded in what I want to achieve. And it's not about me. This is actually about people's jobs, people's livelihoods, the chance of a better future. And I think the country, frankly, right now wants a majority government, a decisive government, a government that's fully accountable. And there is this fear, rightly, that if we don't get that, we could end up with Ed Miliband propped up by the SNP, really wrecking this country, and that frightens me.
Prime Minister, thank you very much.